important things in his life, such as working for Prime Minister Netanyahu. But I think what is so amazing is he's someone who really cares about our people, as evidenced by what he has started with Shavei Israel, which is an organization that Michael founded to help connect Jews who have been scattered all over the world to their community and to bring them home to Israel. Michael has been living in Israel for the past decade. You may have seen some of his work in lots of publications, such as the Jerusalem Post, where he's a syndicated columnist. But you didn't come to hear me talk about Michael. You came here to hear Michael talk about Shavei Israel. So without further ado, I'd like to thank you for coming. Remind you to turn off your cell phones, please. And we will have some time for Q&A afterwards. So please save your questions until then. So now we'll welcome Michael. Thank you again for being here, and enjoy the show.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out, and thank you, Natalie, for that great introduction. I especially like the part about sexy and National Geographic.
How we sell things around here.
No, I can appreciate that. I'm visiting here, New York, with my friend Shavei, who's in the back, who is a B'nai Menashe community leader from northeastern India. And in a few minutes, I'm going to turn the stage over to him so that he can share his personal story with you and better familiarize you with this community of lost Jews from the far reaches of India. For Tzvi, this is his first visit here in New York, and I've been roaming the streets with him and taking in some of the sights. And I happen to notice myself, and I'm sure you notice it all the time, what a diverse place New York City is. Just walking down any block, the different types of people that one sees it's really staggering. It's almost a sociological experiment on every avenue. And yet, at the same time, from a Jewish point of view, New York is not as diverse, I dare say, having grown up here. I know from my own experience, most of us grow up, we are white Ashkenazim, and we tend to think of the world, or the Jewish world, in those terms, as being white and Ashkenazi, and that everyone has seen Fiddler on the Roof at least twice. But there is, just like on the streets of New York, there is a much wider Jewish world out there, a much more diverse Jewish world. And that diversity, I think, while some might view it as a weakness, ultimately it is one of our greatest strengths as a people. We are one nation with many faces. Anyone who walks down the streets of Jerusalem right away sees that Jews come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. And that is the beauty of our people. Now, does anyone know how many Jews there are in the world?
I don't think so.
13 million. Approximately 13 million is the number that most demographers say, that most of them put out there. Now, if you go back 2,000 years, the oldest census known, that is extant, was taken in China. And that census at the time found that there were 57.5 million Han Chinese in the world. At the same time, historians claim, there were 8 to 10 million Jews in the world. So for every one Jew, there were about 7 or 8 Han Chinese. If we jump ahead 2,000 years to the present, we see that just like in the economic field, we haven't been able to keep up with China's growth rate. They have far surpassed us numerically and demographically. And the obvious question that comes to mind is, well, why is that the case? Why is it that there were 8 to 10 million Jews 2,000 years ago, and now we're only about 13 million? whereas the Chinese have gone from 57 million to over 1 billion. It's an obvious question, and there's essentially an obvious answer, which is that we have been kicked around and thrown out of just about every decent country, and a few of the indecent ones, down through our history. We have been persecuted, we have been massacred, we have been forced to convert. You name it, and it's been done to us. And that has an impact, of course. We have lost Jews down through the centuries, and we have Jews who, as a result of all that persecution, have decided to get lost, so to speak. I personally feel that we the Jewish people, have a responsibility to reach out to the descendants of those communities and to facilitate their return, to draw them closer to our people and to their heritage. About 12 years ago, I made Aliyah 15 years ago, and when Prime Minister Netanyahu, during his first term of office back in the 90s, I went to work for him in the communications department. Essentially, we were handling propaganda. We were fighting the good fight. We were defending Israel's image in a very hostile media environment. Not much has changed in that regard, unfortunately, but we're not here to talk about that. One day, a letter arrived to the Prime Minister from this community in northeastern India, the Bnei Menashe, the sons of Manasseh, who claimed descent from one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. 2,700 years ago, after the death of King Solomon, the Jewish people, as they tend to do, they became divided among themselves. And there was a northern kingdom of 10 tribes and a southern kingdom of Judah. We, the Jews, are descendants of Judah, hence the name Jews. 2,700 years ago, the Assyrian Empire, which was the superpower at the time, invaded the land of Israel, captured the northern kingdom, took these 10 tribes, and cast them off into exile. And they seemingly disappeared into the mists of history. Now, just to put things in perspective, during the Holocaust, in 1939, there were 18 million Jews in the world. In 1945, there were 12 million left. 1/3 of our people were murdered. Not to compare the two, but when the 10 tribes were taken from us 27 centuries ago, it was 10 out of the 12 tribes. It was 75, 80% of all the Israelites at the time were simply gone, disappeared. But even though the Bnei Menashe were lost to us, they never forgot who they were. And they never forgot to where they dreamed of returning. So I'm sitting there in the Prime Minister's office at my little desk, and here's this letter from this community. And it turned out that they had been writing to Israeli prime ministers since at least Golda Meir, and perhaps even back to David Ben-Gurion, and they'd never gotten an answer. I read this letter, and it sounds interesting. And initially, I didn't really believe the whole bit about them being from a lost tribe, but I decided I'll meet with some of them. And I met with some members of the community who had managed to make it to Israel, and I was very taken by them on a human level, on a personal level, by their sincerity, by their commitment to wanting to be part of the people of Israel. And I figured if someone is crazy enough to want to join us, then why shouldn't we swing open the door and enable them to do so? So I became involved through the bureaucracy in arranging for groups of the Bnei Menashe to come to Israel. And over the past decade, thank God, we have brought 1,700 members of this community back to Israel, which is closing a historical circle that was opened, like I said, more than 27 centuries ago. There are another 7,000 B'nai Menashe still in India waiting to come, and we are actively lobbying the Israeli government for permission to bring the remaining members back home to Israel, which is where they dream of returning. Now, in 1999, when Mr. Netanyahu was tossed out of office, I then began thinking more broadly about this question of descendants of Jews. And it occurred to me through my studies that there were all these communities out there in the big wide world that have a historical connection to us and that are still conscious of that connection and want to do something about it. So I began traveling to all these far-flung National Geographic kind of places, not necessarily sexy, but National Geographic. And lo and behold, I discovered that in places such as Spain and Portugal, there are B'nai Anusim, or Marranos. There are people whose ancestors were compelled to convert to Catholicism more than 5 centuries ago, around the time of the Inquisition, but who nonetheless, down through the generations, continued to pass that heritage on, often at great risk to themselves and to their families. On the other side of the globe, in China, in the city of Kaifeng, there is a community of descendants of Jews. There was a Jewish community in Kaifeng, Chinese Jews, for over 1,000 years. They largely assimilated in the 18th and 19th century, but until today, there are 1,000 people there who look Chinese, who speak Chinese, but whose hearts and whose souls are very much connected to being Jewish. And fortunately, in recent years, we've been able to bring some of those young people from Kaifeng also to Israel. And we have the beginnings of a nascent Chinese Jewish community in Israel. In Poland, we work with another community known as the Hidden Jews from the Holocaust era. After the war, 10% of Polish Jewry had survived. Many of them went back to Poland. And because of the persecution and the oppression that they had endured under the Nazis, followed by the repressive communist rule, many of them chose to hide their identities, to essentially go underground as Jews. In other cases, there were Jewish children whose parents put them up for adoption when they saw that the Nazi inferno was coming, in the hopes that their children would be saved and perhaps they could come back after the war and reclaim them. In many cases, that did not happen, and those Jewish children grew up thinking and believing that they were Polish Catholics. Now, in recent years, with the downfall of communism and with the decline of the power of the Catholic Church, more and more people in Poland are uncovering that hidden heritage that their parents or their grandparents or even their great-grandparents had sought to flee from. This is a phenomenon that is stretching literally from one end of the earth to the other. And I believe that it is in our interest as a people not to ignore this phenomenon, but to embrace it and to recognize it as being a phenomenon of incredible potential for us as a nation. We are, after all, a small people, and we are losing Jews all the time, and we are growing smaller in size. Reaching out to descendants of Jews is something that can counter that trend in many ways. Many of these people who we work with are not necessarily interested in conversion or making aliyah or even becoming Jewish again. They simply have an intellectual or an emotional curiosity. What does it mean that their ancestors were once Jews? And I've seen it time and again in place after place, the moment someone discovers or rediscovers their Jewish roots, it creates a greater affinity within them for Israel and for Jewish causes. So if we are smart enough, if we are wise enough to cultivate this phenomenon, we stand to benefit from it in fields ranging from diplomacy to hasbara, to explaining Israel's position. And of course, at the end of the day, a certain number, a certain percentage of those people will in fact decide to return. So ultimately, it will strengthen us demographically as well. And we also have to bear in mind, as we all know, that we're living in a globalized world, whatever exactly that means. But the world is getting smaller, and there are nations such as China and India which are rising in power, rising in importance. So it behooves us to have not just American Jews and British Jews and even French Jews, but it behooves us also to have Indian Jews and Chinese Jews so that we as a people can better navigate whatever changes may lie ahead. Now, before I ask Tzvi to come up and tell his story, I just want to share with you a very brief story about one of the young women from Kaifeng, from China, whom we brought to Israel a few years ago. This is a young woman named Jin. Now, she had grown up with a very strong sense of Jewish identity. She didn't really know what that meant because already for 2 or 3 generations, communism had been in place there, and whatever customs that her grandparents or great-grandparents had still held on to had largely disappeared. All she knew was that her father had told her, "We come from the people of Israel, and one day that is where we will return." As China opened up, as the internet penetrated, she suddenly had access to more and more information that was previously beyond her reach. I visited Kaifeng several years ago, and I met with Jin and another contingent of the descendants of the Kaifeng Jewish community, and it was clear to me that they were sincere in wanting to come back to our people. So a few years ago, we brought 4 young women from Kaifeng over to Israel. They spent a year studying, preparing to undergo a formal process of return or conversion. And I remember at the end of the year, I accompanied these young ladies to the Beit Din, to the rabbinical court in Jerusalem. And it was a very strange setting because you had the 3 dayanim, the 3 rabbinical court judges, sitting there. And here is this young Chinese woman who is looking to come back, to join this people. And as part of the process, the dayanim question the potential convert, probing their knowledge and their sincerity, asking them questions about Jewish belief and practice. And I've been to many sessions of the conversion court, and I have to say that rarely have I seen someone do such a phenomenal job answering question after question about philosophical concepts, about the laws of keeping the Sabbath. There were even some of the questions that were asked that I didn't know the answer to, and I was glad I wasn't the one who had to go through that process. But in any event, Jin passed with flying colors, and it's traditional that when a person converts, so the rabbis then inform the person that they have succeeded and they are welcomed back into the people of Israel. And Jin, of course, became very emotional. And then the rabbis asked her, "What name would you like to take upon yourself? What Hebrew name would you like to take?" Now, most women who go through the process choose the more obvious Jewish names: Sarah, Rachel, Rebecca, the standard Jewish names. Jinjin told the rabbis she wanted to be called Yecholia. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard that name before, but I can tell you that even in Israel, it's not the most common name that one hears. So much, it's the kind of name that like a kindergarten kid would get beaten up for if he had that name. But everyone in the room, we all sort of looked at each other wondering, why does she want this name, Yecholia? I mean, it's even hard to pronounce. So one of the rabbis very gently asked her, where did you hear this name? Where is this name from? And Jinjin was very surprised, and she said, it's in the Bible. And these are three very learned rabbis sitting up there. And no one in the room knew where this name appeared in the Bible. So they asked her, are you sure? Where in the Bible? Where in the Bible is there this name? So she took out her Chinese Bible and is flipping the pages. And she found the verse I think it's in the second book of Chronicles, where it mentions the name of the mother of one of the kings of Israel was Yecholia. So here was this Chinese Jewish woman teaching the rabbis in Jerusalem a verse in the Tanakh. But that's not the end of the story. One of the rabbis then asked her, well, very nice, okay, it's in the Bible, but why do you want this name? And then Jinjin told everyone present that ever since she was a little child, like I told you earlier, her father had said to her that one day they would come back to the Jewish people. And that as strange as it might seem to her, as impossible as it might seem, she should always remember that God can do anything. Now, she told the rabbis, now that she was standing here in Jerusalem as a Jew, as an Israeli, now she knew that her father's words had come true, and that God truly can do anything, and that she had come home to her people. And she is now living as a Chinese Jew, a religious Chinese Jew in Jerusalem. By the way, she's still single, so if any guys here are single, we can talk afterwards. But now I'd like to ask Tzvi to come up and just tell you a little more about the Bnei Menashe, the descendants of this lost tribe, who are also in the process of coming back.
First of all, I think Michael was reading this kind of opportunity very important. Our brothers and sisters here, love name and name.
Louder.
I'm going to put a mic on you because just put it right there. If you just want to put it in your pocket. There you go. Thank you.
Thanks. Not the least, I also want to thank Rebecca, who organized this wonderful event, sharing one another. And then, not the least, but the last, to thank them, to thank you. All those who come together to hear about Bnei Menashe, your interest and your curiosity, to hear more about your brothers and sisters who have been exiled and scattered all over the world, the four corners of the earth. As we all know, with the Jews, be it in America, be it in Europe, be it in Asia, northeastern parts of India, Bnei Menashe, which is very true that we sometimes take things very lightly and take it for granted that everything is from Hashem or everything it should be, and take it for granted everything. But sometimes we fail to understand. Sometimes we see so we don't see beyond the faces, or we don't see beyond the skin. If we see beyond the faces, or if we see beyond the physical appearance, or if we see beyond the skin, we could penetrate through the treasures and the heritage, how rich is Israel, the nations of Israel. So that is exactly the message that I am standing in front of all of you. That is the real ingathering of the exiles. Who did the ingathering of the exiles? That is, of course, it is from above, but Hashem is not a robot. Who is responsible for all these things? We, the people, the Bnei Manasseh, Yehuda, all the Jews as a whole are part and parcel of that process of ingathering of the exiles. Also, it's true, the ingathering of the exiles depends on us also, and then the scattering of the exiles, especially the 10 tribes, are also depends on us. That is our fault. That is our mistake, that we take it for granted many things. And then there is the point that I want to stress why we meet together here, who bring together here. Today, history is created here in New York. Why I say this, you just look at yourself, you ask your previous generations or forefathers, no time, not in the first generation, not in 100 years back, not in 200, 500 years back, Bnei Manasseh coming from the northeastern parts of India, shaking hands with our brothers and sisters here in New York, our brothers and sisters, Yehuda, tribes of Yehuda. This is history. That is why I say today, we are living in a very lucky generation. Previous generations have been looking for these things to happen, but they didn't merit it so. We see today the ingathering of the exiles. We are living in a lucky generation. You see, not only from India I could make aliyah, this aliyah, the fulfillment of my dream or my forefathers' dreams, it was not fulfilled before me, before the previous generations. That shows that I am living in a lucky generation. My parents, my forefathers, since 2,700 years back, as soon as they were taken away by the Assyrian king, as Michael mentioned it, they longed to return home, but they could not do so. Myself, I make aliyah, I could make it in the year 2000, with my wife, with my son, 2 years old, in the year 2000, leaving behind all those ambitions, all those aims in India. I did my graduation, BA Economics in Delhi University, and then I finished in the year 1996. My parents, I was lucky that I was brought up in a very, very traditional Bnei Manasseh family. They could foresee what is going to happen within 10 years from now, from then. That is why they did whatever they could to reach Eretz Israel, the promised land, the Holy Land, but they could not do so. So they could foresee that if they didn't train, they didn't educate their kids, their children like me, to fulfill those dreams, their dreams and my dream, they could not make it so. That is why they sent me in good schools. You learn in a good school, go to college to become an IAS officer, Indian Administrative Officer, which is a white collar job. If you go through that one, you could have some kind of influence or ability utilizing all those knowledge to connect with our mainstream brothers and sisters in Israel, the Holy Land, so that may open a door or a gate to make it to Zion. Exactly when I go through all those exams to get that job, I got a call that I could really make Aliyah in the year 2000. Leaving behind all those things, all those dreams and ambitions, I make Aliyah in 2000. And then the hard part of my life is that, you see, I make Aliyah in 2000 with my kid, leaving behind all my parents, my siblings, and all my community members, 7,000 of them. And then when I say goodbye to them, when they drop me off, when they see me off in the airport, I didn't know what to say. On the other hand, I'm very happy that I could make it so. On the other hand, I didn't know when should they come. I didn't know what is my ability, whether I could succeed in convincing, in finding Michael Freund like an angel, Michael Freund, to do that, who has got the ability, who has got the willpower to push forward, taking all the pains and activities to hasten the Aliyah of Bnei Manasseh. I didn't know that. And then just after 1.5 months of life in Israel, my second son was born. I did Brit Milah. I love the country. I love all those who have been here dear with me at that time. I miss my parents, siblings. And then yesterday, one of my good friends, where I put up in Manhattan Street, he called me, Svi, how is my mom? I said, I got a real motherly treatment from your mother. She is my mother. I haven't received this kind of motherly treatment the past 10 years. In New York, I got a motherly treatment. How much more so if I miss my parents? How much more so my parents miss my kids? That is the hard part of life. And then we take many things for granted. Today, you just see me. If you look at my face, the Jews, according to the Torah also has got 70 faces. Till today, I have come across 3 faces of Jews. One is black, they call it Kus, the Ethiopians. One is like Thailandese, Chinese, what they call, like myself. And then the third group is white, like my brothers here in New York, my brothers and sisters. And then what is missing is another 67 faces. Just like that, two years back, I visited my friend here in downtown. Alone, I got here. I walk around the streets. I just take a couple of pictures, and then I just don't see that this is very special, rich in history, magnificent history, and then important place. I didn't know that. And then today, this morning, my friend Ronnie took me for a walk, 20-30 minutes, explaining to me this is New York University, how it was set up, how important it was. There was the New Amsterdam, it was called before, because the Netherlands was setting up those things. I come to realize myself, we Jews take it for granted. Just like that, when he explained to me, when I know the deeper meaning, how rich is the history of the Jews, the armed Israel. So we have to, in order to know more about it, we should have the curiosity to know. We need to have some kind of patience to learn more. Be'ezrat Hashem, we rely on miracles. Sometimes we have to rely, miracles come, miracles go, it will come again. But the ingathering of the exiles also, or Messiah will come one day. Even Messiah, we can hasten it. The rabbis taught us in many sources, we can even hasten it. Just like that, the ingathering of the exiles does not happen simply the way it should be. Someone have to do it. Someone have to do it. So who did it, all these things? Thanks to Michael Freund, Shavei Israel is doing the great job in this holy task. All of us are in that process. All our efforts together, we move forward. Together, we will see all our brothers and sisters who have been stuck still, the 7,000, together, working together, praying, whatever contribution we have. Someone could pray, someone could help financially, our moral supports to one another. That will create, that will help hasten all the coming of the Messiah, and then the ingathering of all the exiles. You see, Bnei Manasseh, wherever we go, just Michael explained to us a couple of minutes back, 2,700 years back, coming again. Why today? If you saw a seed of the seed of an orange, it will never produce apple. The seed is implanted. The seed is important. Wherever you plant it in India, whether you plant it here in New York, in Europe, it is the same. After 2,000 years, we knew ourselves. Not a day passed, not a week passed without remembering Zion. It is not something that the identity, my identity, that I am the sons of Bnei Manasseh, one of the sons of Bnei Manasseh. I am part and parcel of the Jews. My identity, even after 2,000 years, I didn't forget it. Why? It is something that we could give it to someone else, or whenever you like, or whenever I like, I don't like it, this seed, or I don't like it, a Jew, to be a Jew. I can not throw away. It is not like nationality. 2000 I make earlier from India. I was then Indian citizen, a bona fide citizen of India. After making earlier 2000, I changed my nationality. Today I'm an Israeli. It is your identity, my identity of Jewishness. You cannot change it over time. I go back to India, settle there, I apply for nationality, Indian nationality, I will get it again. You can change even more than 10 times your nationality, but I cannot do so, my identity. That is not that something that you could give it. Here, I am not an American. I could even get American citizenship with the help of all of you. After 10 years, I don't know, after 20 years or 30 years, I could change my nationality. The customs, traditions, and my identity, I could not change that. Just like that, my forefathers, who have been exiled more than 2,000 years, they have been practicing the customs and traditions of Bnei Manasseh. But unfortunately, the British come to India, penetrate through the northeastern parts of India in the year 1833. Manipur and Mizoram, the Christian missionaries, they could penetrate in the year 1910 and 1890. They say to us, they knew who we were, but they didn't want to disclose the reason being known to them better than us. They said, you are practicing those kinds of traditions and customs, sacrifices which is of no longer use. It is outdated. The temple is destroyed. We no longer practice. If you practice, even that is a sin. They thought like that. But a good number of the younger generation, when they said, we have a new one, you don't have to practice, this is stupid. When they say this is a Western religion, this is European religion, the younger generation, they take it, they value all those Western cultures, religions, and then a good number of us embrace Christianity. Even then, still a good number of our forefathers cling onto those old traditions and customs, what they call. It is not at all. There is no old tradition, there is no new, there is no future tradition. B'nai Manasseh tradition, Jewish traditions and cultures, the precepts and the laws, it is forever the same. It is eternal. Even then, like my forefathers, they cling onto that traditions and customs through their merit I could make earlier. In order to do so, we need patience. We need to do something else. We have to be active, not wait. We should not be passive, waiting for the Messiah to come. It will never come to you, Messiah. You have to do something else. We have to do our part. Hashem will do his part. I make earlier in 2000, straight I go to Kiryat Arba. Why? Simply Kiryat Arba. Many people, they ask me, why simply Kiryat Arba? Being exiled for more than 2,000 years, I want to reconnect with my roots. Where is the root? Where is my root? Many Jews, we fail to understand where is our root. My root is Abraham Avinu, Isaac Avinu, Jacob Avinu. They were buried there in Ma'ala Damakpela, so I chose. And then another reason, which is not less important, is that I want to bring up my kids, my children, Torah education, Jewish environment, Jewish educational setup. That is why I chose simply Kiryat Arba. That I could not do so. I was not brought up in a Jewish education, but I cannot put the words backwards. So I have to move forward, look forward. My kids are myself. The continuation of B'nai Manasseh, the continuation of Am Israel. That is why I want to give them Torah education, Jewish education. So I moved to Kiryat Arba. Till today, I'm living in Kiryat Arba. There are so many things to tell about the rich heritage of Am Israel, the rich history of B'nai Manasseh. I don't know where to start. As I didn't know where to start, I didn't know where to stop. So I stop here. Thank you all. And then if anyone has a question, I will try my best. We will try with Michael to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael and Svi. We are really lucky to have you guys here. This is so cool. So we'll start taking questions now. I'll just kind of, get it going and then direct it, and we'll start over here.
Oh, you see.
Yes, please.
Hi, Michael. My name is Greg. I've been working on a photography exhibit called The Lost Jews of India for about the past 2 years. So I've been documenting sort of tribes in India. What do you guys, and majority of what I hear back from them is, one, they don't want to leave the heritage that their parents have left for them. A lot of them have synagogues that only have one person in there. They still pray there for Sabbath, but you only get like 2 people for Shabbat prayers. What is your thoughts to reconnecting those people?
Okay, I assume you're referring to the Indian Jewish community.
Indian, correct.
Right, the B'nai Israel, the
Correct.
Kochini Jews, and
Correct.
just so people understand, the B'nai Menashe live in the far northeast of India. This is southern India.
Correct.
This is the other side of India, and India is just an enormous country. So there was never really any contact between the two communities. It's only in the past 2 decades that there has been contact between them. We're not involved with the Indian Jewish community per se, so I can't speak to that issue vis-a-vis them. But when it comes to B'nai Menashe, the B'nai Menashe feel a very strong desire to rejoin contemporary Judaism, to embrace contemporary Judaism. As Tzvi touched upon, their ancestors, because they left 27 centuries ago, they did not have much of the oral tradition that we have. So, for example, the B'nai Menashe did not know about Hanukkah or Purim or Tisha B'Av, the fast day, Tisha B'Av, for the simple reason that their ancestors left before the events that we commemorate for those days. In the process of re-embracing contemporary Judaism, the B'nai Menashe have, naturally enough, begun to sort of leave behind some of their traditions. And that is a process which, on the one hand, is to be expected, but on the other hand, we are making an effort to try and save or preserve as much as we can. What do I mean by that? They have their own tunes for the prayers, very unique tunes. So we have been taping those tunes and putting out collections of those tunes. We have been taking down many of the traditions that the elders of the community still remember, the legends, the folk tales, etc., so that information at least is not lost forever. Because I think that tradition has intrinsic value. It is precisely that tradition which kept them, kept their Israelite or Jewish consciousness alive down through the generations. So to see it tossed aside, I think, would be tragic. So we are making an effort, we're very conscious of the value of trying to not see that tradition lost in the process.
We'll take one up here.
Have you ever heard of Brit with Yair Davidi?
Yes.
Because he claims the whole world is Jewish. Ephraim and Reuven are from Britain and Ireland, and tribe of Dan is from Denmark. And were there any non-Jews in the world ever? So the whole world was Jewish, and everyone suffered from amnesia. And you have I know. But what I'm saying, I'm not saying anything about Menashe or whatever.
What's the question? Sorry.
The question is, it seems like a lot of people from around the world want to claim to be lost Israelites. You even have blacks in Times Square who are claiming that we're the imposters and they're the real Jews because of something in Devarim that they came over in ships. So it seems like ever since the creation of the State of Israel, everybody's Jewish. In fact, they did say, and I heard in Crown Heights, that before Mashiach comes, everyone's going to want to be Jewish. And I thought, well, Mashiach's never coming because no one's going to want to be Jewish.
But what's the question?
The question is, how do we know the authenticity of all the people, of all the tribes?
So how do you deal with
northern tribes?
Okay.
So how do you deal with
like
authenticity
Benjamin
issues
No,
those must come up in rabbinic courts and with the government of Israel.
No, absolutely, and it's a perfectly legitimate question to ask because, as the gentleman suggests, there are all kinds of communities out there around the world nowadays who are asserting some kind of historical connection with the Jewish people. For example, a few months ago, I received a letter from a Cherokee Indian or Native, I'm not sure what the right term is anymore, but a Cherokee group in Tennessee claiming that they are a lost tribe of Israel and providing what they view as evidence to back up this claim. Now, personally, I read that, and I respect everyone's right to, declare themselves to be whatever they want to be. If they want to call themselves a Vulcan or a Martian, that's their right. Personally, I was not convinced by the case that they made. I didn't find it to have any merit in terms of logic or facts or history. Our approach is, whenever we take a look at a new community that we're thinking of becoming involved with, our initial approach is always to take a position of skepticism, because it's very easy to get swept away emotionally and to start to find Jews wherever one looks. And doing so would not be fair to history or to reality. So every community, we look at it skeptically and we say, show us the evidence, show us the proof. Now when it comes to B'nai Menashe, there is just a whole range of compelling evidence to indicate that their claim is true. There are a range of historical traditions and customs that they maintain. We don't have time to go into all of them now, but for example, Svi mentioned that when the British missionaries and military officials arrived in that area about a century ago, they had a habit, I guess at night they didn't have late night television, so they had a habit of keeping diaries. We have a lot of those diaries that they kept. And if you look in those diaries, you will see how they describe their astonishment at discovering this population group at the end of the earth, no offense intended, but in this far-flung region of India, this community which was familiar with the stories of the Bible, which referred to God by the Hebrew name Yah, which spoke of its longing, its collective longing to return to the place known as Zion, and which was essentially practicing biblical Judaism, even though there was no surrounding population in that area that could possibly have infected them with these belief systems. So there are a lot of compelling reasons to say that B'nai Menashe are in fact who they say they are. And finally, I would just add that back in 2004, I approached Israel's Sephardic chief rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Amar, and I asked him to study the B'nai Menashe community and to issue a ruling regarding their status in the eyes of Jewish law, just like the rabbinate has done vis-a-vis other communities in the diaspora. Rabbi Amar studied the issue carefully. He sent a delegation of rabbis to India to learn more about it and to report back to him. And in March of 2005, after carefully sifting through the evidence, he concluded that the B'nai Menashe are what are known as Zera Yisrael. They are descendants of Israel, and that because they were cut off from us, from the rest of the Jewish people for so long, they need to undergo a conversion process to remove any doubts about their individual personal status. So, and believe you me, as they say, for the Israeli chief rabbinate to make a determination like that, it's not something that happens every day, and it's not something that is pulled out of a hat. There's got to be a compelling case to be made there.
I'm going to take license and ask a question since I work here and do that. Svi, thank you again for joining us. I really am curious, piggybacking on what Michael was just talking about, how was your welcome into Israel, into Israeli society? Did you feel you had the sense of you're going home? When you got there, did you feel like you were home? Did Israelis treat you like the brother that you are?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are so many answers to give on that question, but from my perspective, and then what I have experienced and what I have gone through, I'll just tell you. From my part, and also all of my brothers and sisters, B'nai Manasseh, all of B'nai Manasseh, we feel when we come back, whether they treat me, we don't expect the Army Israel or the government will roll us a red carpet. We didn't expect that, but we are happy. Each and every one of us, 100% is happy. Today, before, and then they'll be happy. Just like that I feel, I saw. And then how they look at it, there are so many questions, different angles, and then I accept it. Some people say, wow, our brothers and sisters, that is the ingathering of the exiles, wow, they embrace us warmly. And then there are some section of peoples, a fraction maybe, they say Chinese, Thailandese, Thais, Chinese, Philippines. And then there are also some people, they say that, why? B'nai Manasseh now? Why not before, 50 years back, 10 years back, or 100 years back? I think the same question is also asked, or was also asked, when the United States of America was getting independence in 1779. 76, sorry.
Close.
Why not before 1775? Why the state of Israel was established or it got independence in the year 1948? Of course, to B'nai Manasseh also, there is some kind of reawakening during the past 70, 80 years. And then we also always long to go to Eretz Israel, but we couldn't do so. They couldn't do so. And then just one example, very funny, that I experienced myself. I walk in one of the supermarket in Jerusalem, and then one of the manager called me Thailandy. No, I'm not Thailandy. Chinese. Call me. I'm not a Chinese. And then I approached him. I am a Jew. I am B'nai Manasseh. I make a living from India. You go to European countries, whoever looks like you say to them you are a Jew, will they accept you? You may get a box on your head. I also asked him whether you could determine or whether Jews have specific physical appearance or not. That's what I asked. He didn't know. Oh, I'm sorry. Those kind of questions and reactions were there in Israel. And then kind of discrimination is all over the world. But my question is, what level of discrimination? Some people, they go extreme. Some people not so. All over the world, there is some kind of discrimination. But I am not bothering to those kind of people who have extreme attitudes towards others. It's simply my face is different. I adjust myself. I don't care. I don't bother about them. I believe in perfect faith that I'm a Jew. I'm part and parcel of Am Israel. I could contribute instead of taking what I should give. So this is also a kind of education for them. I think that answers your question.
Great.
Thanks.
Let's try one in the back, I think. Yeah. Yes, please. Thank you.
I'm just curious, Mr. Freund, the question of who is a Jew is so explosive, and particularly with conversion also being particularly explosive these days. How have you found dealing with the rabbin? Have you found them to be reasonable, unreasonable, a little bit of both? I mean, it seems like every other day the issue of conversion is in the newspapers, and this is obviously an even more potentially sensitive issue of trying to figure out who is indeed Jewish.
The bureaucracy that exists in Israel, the religious bureaucracy, is such that it has turned off many Israelis, as we know, including many religious Israelis. And so certainly when we are trying to help people to navigate that bureaucracy, at times, well, let's just say I used to have a much thicker head of hair than I do right now. However, despite all that, it has been our experience that when we bring people such as B'nai Menashe or the Kaifam descendants to the Beit Din, to the rabbinical courts, generally speaking, there is a much more welcoming attitude towards them because the rabbis view them as lost Jews coming back. So they view them as what I called before Zera Yisrael, as descendants of Israel, and so they make more of an effort to make the process a little more user friendly, with a few more smiles thrown in. But there is no doubt that it is a bureaucracy that is much in need of change. If that answers your question.
We will have one more question, as long as it's from a woman. We have not heard from a... Okay. I need to have some sort of gender balance here, guys.
I actually have two questions probably for both of you.
Oh, so wait, that's two questions.
I did say one more. You guys can decide which one you want. How about that for democracy?
No, we'll settle for two. We'll settle for two.
So one question was, so the cultures and traditions that the tribe has, is it more similar to the Ashkenazi traditions or Sephardic? And the second question was actually about both the Chinese descendants and and this one. Is there any kind of language that was preserved that they speak among themselves?
Okay. In terms of the first question, Ashkenazi versus Sephardic, we just have to understand that those terms are terms that came into play in Jewish history much later on.
Yeah.
When the B'nai Menashe, the original Israelites, were living in the land, there were no Ashkenazim and there were no Sephardim. They were only Israelites.
Is there any kind of similarity at all?
No. They were essentially living according to the written Torah. They were carrying out the sacrificial rites. They were keeping the holidays and the festivals and keeping kosher and the laws of family purity as best as they knew how. But to point to some similarities with Sephardic or Ashkenazi custom would not be accurate and perhaps not even relevant. Nowadays, the B'nai Menashe living in Israel and in India, some of them have adopted the Sephardic rites, and some of them have adopted the Ashkenazic rituals. We leave it up to them. It is their choice what they prefer.
Do they have to go in buckets?
I'm sorry?
Do they have to choose one of the buckets, or they just want it themselves?
Well, they want to feel, like Svi said before, that they are rejoining the mainstream, and the way to do that essentially is to identify with, one of the two leading one of the two main types of customs. I personally am Ashkenazi, so if they ask me, I say, our prayer services are usually quicker, and we.
You can't eat rice on Passover.
But you can't eat rice on Passover, so it's a trade-off. But we leave it up to them to decide. And in terms of your second question, the descendants in Kaifang, again, up until about 2-3 generations ago, they were still holding on to some customs, such as not eating pork, which in China is a big deal, or in some cases not working on Saturday, on Sabbath, even though in China Saturday is a regular work day. But there was no unique language that they held on to. The last rabbi of Kaifeng passed away about 200 years ago, in the beginning of the 19th century. And slowly but surely, the community essentially disbanded as a collective entity. And they lost their knowledge of Hebrew because there was no one there to teach them. In fact, last year we brought a group of 7 young men from Kaifeng on Aliyah. And one of them, a young guy named Yaakov Wang, his dream, once he completes the conversion, is to go for rabbinical ordination. He wants to be the first Chinese rabbi. I'm sorry, it's hard to say that with the straight face, but he wants to be the first Chinese rabbi in 2 centuries, so that he can better help his community to return.
And what about the
So the B'nai Menashe, they preserved various words, various Hebrew words that stayed with them. I mentioned before the name of God, or Zion.
Like Sekel,
Or
Sekicha, Sekini.
Right, up until the Indian rupee was introduced as the currency, the B'nai Menashe referred to their currency as the shekel. That was
Sekicha, Sekini, Sekithum.
right.
And then counting of the days of the weeks. Nichat, Nini, Nithum, Nili, Ninga. After Ninga, 5 days. And then Kiginni. After the Kiginni, Friday is Kiginni. And then Cholni. Cholni is rest day. And then the months of the years. Tapul, Tadou, Takau. There is no January, February, and so on and so forth. And then so many customs and cultures have been preserved, which is, even today relevant.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all.
I know I'm going to go call my mom and tell her this is the coolest night of my job.